No. The word landed in the boardroom like a dropped gavel. Everett Colborne did not look up from the contracts spread before him. He simply turned the page, uncapped his pen, and made a small mark in the margin, the way a man might swat at something inconvenient. Without urgency, without doubt, without the faintest acknowledgement that the person standing across the table from him was worth the trouble of eye contact. The woman who had spoken the word, Dr. Vivienne O.C. Ashford, Chief Estate Counsel for the Colborne Family Trust, had watched men like Everett for 23 years. She had watched them in courtrooms and conference rooms, across dining tables set with more silverware than most households owned, and she had learned that when a man like Everett said nothing, he was not thinking. He was waiting for the noise to stop. She gathered her files and left without another word. What she did not do was tell the junior associate waiting outside the room that the meeting was over. She did not forward the revised amendments to the opposing counsel. She did not respond to the 3 emails that arrived in her inbox between the elevator and the lobby. Each one from a different member of the Colborne board, each one asking if she had reconsidered her position. She had not reconsidered anything. The office of Colborne Capital occupied the top 4 floors of a glass tower on Bay Street in Toronto. On a clear morning, you could see the lake from the 42nd floor, which was where Everett kept his private office, a room so deliberately austere that visitors often felt they had done something wrong simply by entering it. There was a desk the color of charcoal. There were 2 chairs, neither of them comfortable by accident. There was a framed architectural drawing on the wall, not art, a drawing, of the original Colborne family home in Rosedale, demolished in 1987 to make way for condominiums that Everett's grandfather had sold for considerably more than cent. Everett was 61 years old. He had been running Colborne Capital since he was 38, and in that time the firm had grown from a mid-sized private equity operation into something that regional newspapers called a quiet empire, and that financial journalists called aggressively unlisted. He preferred neither description. He preferred no description at all. Descriptions invited scrutiny, and scrutiny invited the kind of attention that slowed things down. He had a daughter. Her name was Charlotte, not Charlie. He corrected people who tried that. And she was 26 years old and worked, as far as anyone in his circle could tell, as some kind of consultant. He was never specific about what she consulted on. When people asked, he would say private sector work and move on in the same tone he used when discussing charitable donations. Technically true, thoroughly unhelpful. What Everett Colborne did not know, or perhaps more accurately, what he had decided not to know, was that his daughter Charlotte Colborne held a master's degree in forensic accounting from the University of Waterloo, had passed her CPA and CFF designations by the time she was 24, and had spent the past 2 years working, very quietly, very deliberately, as an independent consultant to a federal task force that most people in his industry had never heard of. He also did not know that she had been reviewing his files for 11 months. The call came on a Tuesday in October. Everett was in a meeting when his assistant Marguerite, who had worked for him for 14 years, and who was, by her own quiet accounting, the only person in the building he actually listened to, knocked twice on the glass door of the conference room and handed him a folded note. He unfolded it under the table without breaking eye contact with the man presenting at the front of the room. He read it once. He folded it again. "Give us 10 minutes," he said to the room. The 12 people seated around the table filed out in the particular silence of people who had been told to leave without being told why. Everett waited until the door was closed. Then he picked up his phone. The man on the other end was his lawyer, a senior partner at a Bay Street firm, whose name Everett paid enough to keep off certain documents. The lawyer's name was Jeffrey Bellworth, and he was not given to panic. But on this particular Tuesday he spoke in a register Everett had not heard from him before. Low, clipped, something underneath the words that was almost careful. The task force has subpoenaed the secondary accounts, Bellworth said. Not the primary, the secondary, the ones attached to the Aldermere structure. Everett was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. When? The filing was dated 2 weeks ago. We received notification this morning. Why are you telling me this morning? Because, Bellworth said, we only found out this morning. There was another silence. Everett walked to the window. Below him, Bay Street moved in its ordinary way. Taxis, cyclists, a woman with a yellow umbrella, all of it completely indifferent to the conversation taking place 42 floors above it. Who is on the task force? He said. Bellworth said a name. Everett did not recognize it. He asked for it again, and Bellworth repeated it, and Everett wrote it on the margin of the folded note in his hand. It read, Colborne, C. He stared at it for a long time. Charlotte had grown up in a house in Rosedale that had 12 rooms and almost no photographs. Her mother, Diane, who had left Everett when Charlotte was 9 and who now lived in Vancouver and called on birthdays and sometimes Christmas, had taken most of the pictures with her. When she invested, not out of sentiment, but because she had been the one holding the camera. Everett had not replaced them. The walls stayed bare, the rooms stayed clean. The house functioned like a diagram of itself. Charlotte had been a quiet child, not shy. There was a difference, and she had understood it. Even then, but observant, the kind of child who sat at the bottom of the stairs and listened to the conversations happening above her and catalogued the things that didn't match. The number on a document and the number spoken aloud. The meeting described in one way to one person and a different way to another. The signature on a form that did not look like the other signatures from the same hand. She had asked her father about these things when she was young. He had smiled at her in the way that powerful men smile at small, inconvenient questions. Indulgently, dismissively, with the clear implication that she would understand when she was older. She understood when she was 24. By 26, she understood considerably more. The task force she worked with operated under a long institutional name that everyone abbreviated. Its mandate was financial misconduct in private capital structures. The kind of misconduct that happened not in dramatic boardroom betrayals but in footnotes, in nested entities, in the quiet arithmetic of accounts that technically existed, and technically complied, and technically recorded everything they were required to record. Technically. Charlotte was good at technically. She had asked to be reassigned when she first recognized her father's name in the filing structure. The task force lead, a methodical woman named Dr. Heather Lau, had looked at her for a long moment and then said, I appreciate the transparency. Do you believe it compromises your analysis? Charlotte had thought about it honestly. No, she said. I think it improves it. Lau had looked at her for another moment. Then she had said, Then we proceed. The meeting was not Everett's idea. It was Bellworth's, which in Everett's view was already a problem, because Bellworth did not suggest meetings. He managed them after the fact that he was suggesting one now, and that he was suggesting it urgently, and that he was suggesting Everett attend it in person. At a specific address in the financial district, on a Thursday afternoon when Everett had a lunch and 2 calls scheduled. All of this told Everett more than Bellworth intended to tell him. He went anyway. The address was a floor of a building Everett did not own and had never entered. The receptionist was unfamiliar. The conference room was smaller than his office. There was no water on the table, which Everett noticed. There were 4 people already seated when he arrived. Bellworth, 2 lawyers he recognized from previous matters, and a 4th person at the far end of the table who was looking at a laptop screen and did not look up when he entered. Everett sat down. He looked at Bellworth. Bellworth looked at the table. Who is she? Everett said. Charlotte closed her laptop. She looked at her father the way she had looked at documents for the past 2 years. Not unkindly, but with the complete and focused attention of someone who had already done the reading and was now simply confirming what the reading had told her. Hi, Dad, she said. The 2 words did not fill the room. They sat in it. The two lawyers at the middle of the table both found reasons to look at their notes. Everett's expression did not change, which was a kind of change in itself. "Charlotte, I requested this meeting," she said. Bellworth agreed it was in everyone's interest. "Bellworth," Everett said, in the particular tone that men like Everett use when they are about to revise the terms of a professional relationship, "did inform me you would be here." "No," Bellworth said. "He didn't." There was a silence. Charlotte opened a manila folder. Inside was a document that ran to 41 pages. She did not hand it across the table. She placed a single page in front of her and rested her hand on it, lightly, the way you might keep a place in a book. "The Aldermere structure," she said, "was filed in 2019 as a passive holding entity. No active management, no discretionary authority, nominal distributions. That's what the filings say." She paused. "That's not what the transfers say." Everett looked at her. "You've been working on my accounts." "I've been working on an investigation," Charlotte said. "Your accounts were part of it. For how long?" 11 months. Something moved across Everett's face. Not anger, not yet. Something more interior than anger. Something that looked, if you were watching closely, like a man recalibrating. "You should have told me," he said. "With respect," Charlotte said. "That's not how investigations work." Bellworth cleared his throat very quietly. No one acknowledged it. Everett had built his career on a particular understanding of information. That it flowed toward power, that the people who controlled the channels controlled the outcomes, that the best protection against scrutiny was not innocence, but architecture. You built the structures carefully enough. You disclosed the things that required disclosure. You kept the rest in motion, and motion was hard to audit. He had explained this to no one, because it did not need to be explained. It was simply how things worked. He had watched it work for 30 years. What he had not accounted for was that his daughter had grown up in the same house as this understanding. She had absorbed it, the way children absorb everything. Not taught but witnessed, overheard, quietly filed, and she had spent 2 years building a picture of it from the outside. The document she had prepared ran 41 pages, but the relevant section was 4 pages that mapped the Aldermere transactions against the public filings. Not in the language of accusation, but in the flat, patient language of reconciliation. Here is what was reported, here is what moved, here is what the difference amounts to, and here is where the difference went. It was not dramatic. It was not designed to be dramatic. It was the kind of work that held up in a room full of lawyers and did not require the person who produced it to raise her voice. She did not raise her voice. She walked through the 4 pages the way she had walked through hundreds of documents before them, methodically, without editorial. Stopping when Bellworth's colleagues had questions, moving on when the questions were answered. Everett said nothing. He sat with his hands flat on the table and listened to his daughter explain, in the patient language of accounting, how the structure he had spent years assembling had been mapped, verified, and prepared for formal disclosure. At one point, one of the middle lawyers leaned forward and said, "With respect to your position here, Miss Colborne, I'm not sure this constitutes." 41 pages, Charlotte said. Page 33. The Wire Summary. The lawyer turned page 33. He did not finish his sentence. It was Bellworth who called for a break, which Everett did not object to. People filed out into the hallway. Someone found water, eventually. Everett stood at the window of the small conference room and looked at the street below. It was a narrower street than the one below his own office. Less traffic. A man was eating a sandwich on a bench without looking at his phone, which struck Everett, for some reason, as unusual. Charlotte stayed at the table. She was reviewing something on her laptop. She had taken off her blazer and draped it over the back of her chair, and she was drinking from a paper cup of coffee, and she looked, in this moment, almost entirely ordinary, except that she was the only person in the room who was not visibly unsettled. "Where did you learn this?" Everett said. He was still facing the window. Charlotte looked up. "What specifically? How to build this kind of case? She thought about it. Partly school, she said. Partly practice. She paused. Partly watching how you structured things when I was growing up. I understood how it worked. I just started working it from the other direction. Everett turned from the window. He looked at his daughter for a long moment. Not the measuring look he gave to opponents. Not the dismissive look he gave to inconveniences. But something that did not have a name in his usual vocabulary. Something that had to do with the distance between what he had assumed and what was standing across the room from him. You could have come to me, he said. Charlotte set her coffee down. With respect, she said again quietly, you would have managed it. She was not wrong. He knew she was not wrong. The formal proceedings took several months. Everett's lawyers negotiated. The task force held its position. Charlotte submitted her materials and stepped back, as the protocol required. Once the formal process began. Her role was analysis, not prosecution, and she had been careful about the line between them from the beginning. What happened to the Aldermere structure was a matter of public record, in the dry and detailed way that financial enforcement actions become public record. The trust was restructured, certain distributions were reversed, a penalty was assessed, and Colborne Capital's filings going forward were placed under an enhanced disclosure requirement. Everett Colborne did not speak publicly about any of it. What he did in January of the following year, quietly, without announcement, was establish a scholarship fund at the University of Waterloo in the Faculty of Accounting. The fund was named for his late mother, Harriet Colborne, who had worked as a bookkeeper for 40 years, and whom Everett had not mentioned in any professional context in the previous 2 decades. Charlotte found out about the scholarship 3 months after it was established, when a colleague at Waterloo sent her a note that said, somewhat cautiously, I think you might want to see this. She looked at it for a long time. She did not call her father. She thought about it, and then she did not. There were things that could be said, and there were things that were perhaps better understood as the kind of quiet correction that didn't need to be named aloud to be real. She put the note in her desk drawer and went back to work. The last time Charlotte Colborne had been in her father's office. Before all of it, before the investigation, before Bellworth's careful Tuesday phone call. She had been 23 years old, visiting over Christmas, and she had sat in one of the 2 uncomfortable chairs while Everett finished a call. On his desk there had been a photograph that she hadn't seen before, small in a plain frame. It was a picture of a building she didn't recognize. Not the charcoal austerity of his offices, but something older, with a wooden porch and white paint and windows that needed work. She had asked about it. After he finished the call, Everett had looked at the photograph for a moment before answering. Your grandmother's house, he said, in Antigonish. She lived there alone, for 30 years after your grandfather passed. Never wanted to leave. What happened to it? It's still there, he said. Her youngest has it now. He had picked up the next file after that, and the conversation had moved on. And Charlotte had not thought about the photograph again until much later, when she was sitting at a desk in Waterloo, going through documents that traced the architecture of a structure her father had built with great deliberateness to keep certain things from being seen. She had thought then about the White House in Antigonish, about a woman who had lived alone for 30 years and never wanted to leave, about the quiet tenacity of holding your ground without needing anyone to acknowledge that you were doing it. She thought about where persistence came from. She thought that maybe it wasn't so hard to trace. Some things are inherited honestly, even when the people who pass them down don't know they're doing it. Some lessons travel sideways, through observation and silence and the long work of understanding what you've been given. Charlotte Colborne had been given a great deal, more perhaps than she could have named at 23 or 26 or even now. But some of what she had been given, she had built herself, and in a small conference room on a Thursday afternoon in October, with 41 pages in a manila folder and a paper cup of coffee going cold on the table, she had shown exactly where it came from.